the films, you're obviously responding to just the strengths, the acting. You're responding to a certain kind of urban quality, which I guess being a little Orange County kid in shorts, you start to go. Like I started slicking my hair back and wearing pants and button-down shirts. Like it changed the way I dress. I was like a kid. I was like, I should dress like I'm in The Godfather. Like I legit did that when I was about 11 years old.
First I got your voicemail, then I got you. We can meet in person or maybe on Zoom. So tell me what's your genre, tell me what do you do. I'd like to know the things that specifically make you.
Hey, I'm Tim Barnes, You Are the Genre, and in every episode of this show, I ask a great new guest about the first genre that inspired them, the first craft that they pursued, and how they feel about that first pursuit now. In this episode, I'm talking to comedian, writer, and filmmaker Ryan Perez. I first met Ryan when we worked at The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon during a very difficult and complex time in America, in the world, in fact. It was during the COVID-19 pandemic, the launch of that. And so I only saw him through a computer screen. It was a time where all the late night hosts were hosting the show in their homes. And I was always fascinated by Ryan. And so little by little, over the years, I've been learning slightly more about him. I was a guest on a couple of episodes of the podcast that he co-hosts called Mama Needs a Movie. He was also a guest on a podcast outside of this that I co-host called Yub Nub. It's a Star Wars-focused podcast. And now he's here. This is where I learned the bulk of all of that juicy information from the legend known as Ryan Perez. I really enjoyed what I did last week, where I didn't do the sort of middle chunk where I talk about stuff. I just kind of did all that in the intro, and it's given me a newfound appreciation for what Mark Maron does. It's a little less work to do it this way as someone who produces his own show. And so if you have been enjoying this podcast, there's a few ways that you can support it. You can leave a nice rating or a review wherever you're listening to it. You can also subscribe to the newsletter that I have connected to it. There's a link to that at your show notes and at youarethegenre.com. Subscribe for free for updates on publicly released episodes. But if you upgrade to a paid subscription, you get advanced episodes and a lot of other cool stuff, honestly. I also like to take a little moment to talk about something that I've simply been enjoying. And right now, there's a song that's been in my head on a loop called The Waters of March. It first got into my head because I was writing a little Instagram story about an art show that my, you know that I don't say the term wife, I say woman king. My woman king had had some of her artwork up at a gallery. And so when I posted about that, I wanted to find a song. And I was like, oh, Art Garfunkel. And the first song that was recommended was the song Waters of March. And I was like, wow, this is, dare I say, a bop. And I was like, I forgot Art Garfunkel wrote this, but it turns out he didn't write that. So then I got even further down the rabbit hole of this song, which is absolutely fantastic. I started listening to the Antonio Carlos Jobim version. He's the one who wrote the song. That's absolutely fantastic. But then I found the ultimate, a bop on top of a bop on top of a bop. The Sergio Mendes version of the song is so fantastic. I recommend that everyone, after you listen to this, listen to that song. It'll set you in any mood that you want to be set in. What I love about this song is that it's equally sad and joyful. So whatever mood you're in entering it, this will soothe it. This will massage that mood in all of the right ways. And this Sergio Mendes version, if you just kind of strip down layer by layer, everything that he adds into this song is beautiful. The orchestration, the strings, the bass, the singer, it's phenomenal. And hey, quick shout out to Freddie Nunez, who created and sings the You Are the Genre theme song that you just heard, and Adam Smith, who produced it. And you know who's also phenomenal is this week's guest, Ryan Perez. Talk about things that I've been enjoying. I loved Conan O'Brien's hosting of this year's Oscars. And if you watched it, there was a man who knocked on Conan's dressing room right before the intro. And that man is the man that you're about to hear right now. My friend, who I've never met in person, Ryan Perez. So here's my conversation with him. Please enjoy. Oh, and one more thing. In this conversation, we started off talking, with audio and video. Then there's some issues, so we went to just audio. And so there's a point in which you will be able to tell that we've switched. I'll put a little record scratch sound there so you really understand, what's happening there. Okay, now, all right, there we go. A little technical ramble there. Enjoy this episode, okay? Whew, what an intro. One thing I can say about you, Ryan, is that even though we've never met in person, it feels like we have. Do you get that feeling?
It's insane at this point. It's
I know.
really like we've had many conversations, many of them recorded by this point, and and yet not met in person. So
You are genuinely one of my favorite people. And on many of these other recorded conversations, I've mentioned that when we both wrote for The Tonight Show, I only experienced it remote during the pandemic. I would often find myself drawn to your face on the Zoom screen and feeling every one of your reactions as you wholeheartedly, very genuinely like, okay, this is what I need to do. I need to make this game for the
oh gosh, well that sounds like a painful thing to witness. Maybe a man try to like very seriously take in, like throwing a frisbee or something as a concept.
Well, while the world's on fire, that's the craziest part of that time. Was like the world was somehow, I don't know, maybe equally, but that was a very scary time, and we were working on a very silly show in a way.
Well, likewise, Tim. It was wonderful to have your friendship there during an incredibly weird time. It's not like it's not like we're on an even keel now.
yeah. Exactly. As you mentioned, I've been on your podcast. You've been on this other podcast that I co-host called Yub Nub. I've learned little bits and pieces about you, and I know that on top of being a great comedian and sketch writer and television writer, you also are a filmmaker.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, yeah, I don't use that term lightly, but I would like to think of myself as, yeah.
I mean, you are though.
Yeah. I would in fact say more so in my heart, more so the being a sketch writer and all that stuff is almost incidental. Over the course of my life, I feel like I almost backed into that, really filmmaking being the kind of first and foremost drive for me.
I'm kind of in a similar boat there where, that was my original goal in life, was to be a filmmaker. And then I kind of found comedy and all the other stuff. But you also have like a really cool roster of things that you've worked on. And I'm curious to know, like, where does, writing for Saturday Night Live stand and like all this stuff? Like you've had an awesome writing journey, I think.
Well, I appreciate that, Tim. I appreciate that, and I appreciate being on the show. And by the way, that theme, your theme, we got to. No one probably calls this out. You sing the hell out of this.
No, I don't sing it. Multiple people think that I sing it. That's how I know. That's how I know you haven't stayed till the end. Where I say my friend Freddie Nunez created and sings the theme song. It's a beautiful theme.
I have heard. I think I have heard that. Maybe.
And I am honored that people think that's my voice.
Okay. All right. It's not true. It's all right. Well, Freddie sings the hell out of it, but I like it. It's always hard when you're trying to figure out a theme for your show. So
it is.
This one has a very invigorating theme that really kicks things off on the right note. So good job, Freddie. Well, particularly Saturday Night Live. It's interesting because they recently did this 50th anniversary.
Yeah.
In which there was sort of endless hours of sort of exaltation of the heritage of Saturday Night Live, and it was very hard to avoid. It was pretty much impossible to avoid this for weeks and weeks at a time. And so I was thinking on it recently, and that experience, I guess, in the overall scope of things, is that it was very important thing to happen when I got the job. It was important for my family and my mother, and it felt like a certain kind of acceptance into like, oh wow, this is something we watched when you were a kid, and that sort of, I guess, legitimacy or not legitimacy is not the wrong word, just an exciting thing to happen, in your life. In terms of my experience there, I was only there for 1 year. And the reason I only lasted a year, to me, is still a little bit hazy. I don't actually know really what it was. I thought that I did a pretty good job there, and I liked working there very much. I'm not one of these writers who complains about the late hours or anything. I would have worked at Saturday Night Live for 20 years if they had let me continue there. So in my life, I can't say people, it's a weird place because I didn't learn anything from working at Saturday Night Live. I have a whole approach that existed before then and existed after then, and I don't think I don't think I learned one thing working there, but like about comedy or anything like that. It wasn't a training ground or anything, because I wasn't there long enough, But so in a weird way, it feels like a prematurely, I hate to use all these early childhood terms, but it's like an aborted experience, you know.
Damn. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like that, unfortunately, that's also like a fairly common experience for that show. For sure.
Oh,
Right? Like
incredibly common, more common than not, more common than the writers that stay there for years are rare compared to the ones that um, go in and out. Yeah.
Did you know that Terry Gross never records with people face to face with her?
Really?
Yeah. It adds a whole new dimension to every conversation you've ever heard her have once you realize that.
Wow. Well, I feel like that's been around, her show's been around before the Zoom era or
Yeah.
Zoom culture. Wow.
Yeah, but
Okay.
I think even if they're in the same building, her preference is to like, and maybe she has a bunch of notes around her or whatever, but she does not. I assume maybe on a few occasions there may have been actors or whoever who insisted that they be in person, but
She says, go sit in that studio over there. I'll sit in this studio, different floor of
yeah,
the same building.
yeah. I
Wow.
always think about that, especially when Adam Driver. I think he kind of stormed out because he doesn't like hearing himself, I guess, and they played a clip during one of her conversations with him, and he left.
Wow. Okay. Driver. Interesting. If I was Adam Driver, I would have a hard time hearing myself too, just because of the baritone, just because of that
Yeah,
deep,
yeah.
deep. Maybe it rattles his bones.
Well, you know what? This feels like a better, just in case I don't use that first part that we recorded and had to start re-recording. I think we kind of just like jump into a little bit what you're talking about. Like you started off with this passion for filmmaking, then you wound up in sketch and comedy, things like that. You had a time at Saturday Night Live, which is a very common occurrence, and I think even at the Tonight Show, having a time there, it's not. Those aren't jobs where it's like any sense of guarantee that you'll be there for a long time. But I know that Saturday Night Live is a very big deal for you, and I wonder how you dealt with that feeling of like, oh, for some reason, after a year of working in this place, it didn't pan out for me. Like, how did you recover from that personally?
I was working at the website Funny or Die before I worked at Saturday Night Live, and I was working at Funny or Die when I lost a job at Saturday Night Live. So I went that day. I just went to work
That's
and continued to write and direct comedy. And so that's how I thankfully was able to just kind of work through it. It wasn't like, oh, I need to find another job or how
yeah.
am I going to reset anything? And
Is that even something that people can do now? Like, was that a time where it's just like maybe Lorne Michaels didn't understand that you were working for this internet thing?
to tell you the truth, I may have. What happened was over the summer, the people at Saturday, or the people at Funny or Die reached out and said, "Hey, over the summer, would you like to work at Funny or Die?" And I was like,
Oh, got it.
"Sure." And then I
Yeah.
didn't ask Lorne or anybody at the show, so
Hmm.
I don't know. They may have found out and gotten mad at me. That might be of why I lost the job. I have no idea. Like I said, it's cryptic. It's like I have no idea why I lost the job. The way that I would describe this is that almost immediately after coming back to Los Angeles, the people that I was working with at Funny or Die at that time became ultimately some of the greatest collaborators in my entire life. I would say that I met within a year of no longer working at Saturday Night Live. I met the people who I am the most thankful for in my entire existence as a creative person.
That's incredible.
This is my friend Scott Gardner, my friend Danny Jelinek, my friends Nick Carosi and Charles Ingram. These guys ended up becoming the directors and writers who I most have never and all the time I came from UCB theater and met wonderful people there, and Saturday Night Live you meet wonderful people, and a lot of wonderful collaborators over the years, but none like that particular set of people. And so it's one of those situations where you go, well, yeah, I guess my life would have been different in this or that way, and certainly I would have made more money, but I wouldn't have it any other way. I truly would not have it any other way. And everyone I have now in my life, probably closer to 10 collaborators, regular people who I work with regularly, creatively. And who's to say that those relationships would have existed if I would have been writing, in 30 Rock for all those years. So it's I guess there's an alternate life where I would have been a lifer at Saturday Night Live, but I don't think I would have preferred that to what I'm doing and to who I met and to what I got to make.
That's great. Yeah, and so much of this show is about craft, and you strike me as someone who takes the craft of it all seriously, which I think a lot of people who work in comedy, you're kind of like trained to, at least not express how seriously you're taking it or to kind of hide how seriously you're taking it. But even when we were writing on the Tonight Show and just, those brief conversations on Slack and Zoom, it felt like there's something deeper going on with everything that you're working on. Like I think what I respected the most is that I could still see the humanity behind behind your eyes, if that makes any sense. It
It's good
feels
that
like
came across as a Slack.
it even came across on Slack.
That's what they call it, Slack, the humanity app.
I guess there was just always something where it's like, I need to know more about Ryan. I don't know if you get that very often, but that just has me excited to dive into this conversation and learn more about your story, I guess.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good to know. That's good to know. Honestly, I'm hearing all this for the first time. I'm excited. I'm excited.
Nice.
I'm going to get on Slack because apparently I do well there.
Well, where are you from?
I'm from Orange County in California.
Maybe that's it. We're
from
all
South Orange
we're
County.
Californians.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
that's what I was sensing, that California camaraderie. I'm
It
from
is, yeah.
South Central LA, and my experience was I wasn't really allowed to go outside, but there is a vibe to there's a specific vibe to the Californians who care about stuff, and maybe that's what I was sensing, because you don't always get that.
Perhaps, yeah. California breeds it. It may be also just like this. So I think being in California and close to entertainment or wanting to be a part of entertainment is a unique experience. It's different than I know a lot of great people that grew up in Minnesota or wherever, but being right next to it, I think is unique. It maybe breeds some kind of drive or something.
Orange County is famously like a pretty Christian conservative area. How did that drive with young Ryan?
I mean, as a kid, it was more. I mean, I guess well, those are different things. The Christian element of it. I grew up in a Christian household. It wasn't a particularly stern or it wasn't I guess what you would call a right wing Christian household. It was a open and accepting one. The conservative element of it, we weren't conservative in my family, but at the time, I grew up in the most conservative congressional district in the nation. It was
Wow.
you could kind of sense it too. It was just a lot of very wealthy people. Not to I tell this way, and it sounds like I'm fabricating it, but we didn't have very much money compared to the neighbors, compared to the sort of the overall community that we lived in. So it was sort of that experience of looking around and going like, oh, a lot of people have, settled. My parents bought their house for like $40,000, and
Oh wow, yeah.
But up around them sprung these, gated communities that were, or I imagine those conservatives lived. I don't know. To tell you the truth, it's a weird experience. You talk about not being able to leave the house. I also feel like I couldn't tell you much about Orange County. That's not what I remember when I remember growing up. I remember being in my room,
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I know exactly what you mean. And maybe like a lot of California is like that. I mean, anyway, but my dad, I grew up in the same neighborhood my dad grew up in, and he was allowed to, get in all kinds of crazy adventures. And I had just kind of like the opposite of that experience in a way. But I loved being in my head. I loved that experience of being in my room, and it makes me feel like maybe you're genuinely okay with silence. Is that true?
Probably, yeah. I mean, definitely okay with being alone. And that's really the experience. When people have different kinds of experiences when they talk about their burgeoning, I'm sure this whole show is about burgeoning creativity, and some people's experiences. I was in a band, or I went and made little films with my friends, or I had a this or that connection, and my experience, my creative experience feels, when I think back on it, feels very lonely. It feels like, okay, you're just in a room with a camera, or you're in a room with a pad drawing. That's how I would characterize it. Not that I didn't have fun with friends and relatives and my sister and stuff making little movies, but a lot of it seems very much a lonely experience.
Do you think a lot of that divide had to do with economics or race or anything, or was it genuinely just like, I prefer being inside?
I don't think any of it was economics or race. I think it was my older sister was very popular and an athlete and everything. She had 1,000 friends. It was it might have just been an interest thing. It might have just been getting involved in getting really obsessive about movies,
Got
at a really young age. It's not that I didn't like other activities. It's just that I really into really into it, very hard to once I had seen by about the age of 10, 12, seen a certain set of movies, it becomes it's as the old saying goes, it's hard to keep them back on the farm, like you can't you can't just go back and watch, you know uh GI Joe,
it.
you're in it.
So it sounds like that's the answer to the first question of what's the first genre that called out to you? Cinema.
Now, and I thought about this question: what
Uh,
is the genre?
yeah,
And I thought about it quite hard, Tim. I paid respect to this question because I
I
thought,
I
well,
appreciate that.
yes, because I don't want to just come in and say anything. Cinema. Now, to me, I was going to say cinema. Cinema is not a genre.
That's
You
okay.
know,
You are, yeah. I try to, I say genre, but I make genre vague at the same time. But I like
and I
that
know,
you're
and I
dedicated to
yes,
specificity.
I know that you make it vague, and so I had a couple different answers for this introduction to cinema or introduction to genre question. The first thing that I was going to say was music videos, like as a genre,
Oh yeah.
because when I was very very little, I saw Thriller and the
Oh yeah.
making of Thriller. And
Yes.
those were very, very fundamental in terms of, oh, there's a set, and there's monsters
Yeah.
that are made out of rubber, and there's makeup, and so that could have been one answer. Is like music videos was the first thing that taught me that there were films. That's one, but I don't think necessarily a very interesting or true answer. Another answer I could give you is the genre of parody
Oh
films,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
Naked Gun and Zucker Abrams Zucker and Mel Brooks, and
Mm.
and Saturday Night Live to a certain extent, and SCTV, Mad Magazine. Like the idea of taking these genres and subverting them and making fun of the tropes. That
Yeah.
also is a little bit of a disingenuous answer, because it's not really like what inspired me to like make movies or anything like that. So the films that really really got in my head were when I was about 10 years old. My parents wanted to show me films that they loved from the 70s.
Mm.
And this is the age that I saw like The Godfather 1, The Godfather 2, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, The Graduate,
Yeah.
Bonnie and Clyde. And so the most genuine answer is the I would actually say the genre of gangster film or mob film or underworld crime film. Those are the movies, and really, really coming to really, really, really blooming when I saw Goodfellas when I was 12. Those are the most defining experiences for me in terms of if any art I've ever experienced in my life. I
Yeah.
will never have. I don't think I will ever have an experience more important than those stretch of movies that I watched from the age of 10 to 13.
That's interesting because I feel like so much of that genre of cinema, it's about the nuances of people. It's about a group of people, and it's about strategy. So thinking about you as a 10-year-old, 10 years old, you said when you started watching this, is that right?
Yeah.
What elements do you think were inspiring you? I'm sure the whole package of it all, but does it tie in anything that you were searching for in life at the time, do you think?
I mean, the Godfather films are those are the ones that I saw first, and
Uh,
those speak to. I mean, first of all, it was just like someone tells you this is the greatest film of all time.
yeah.
Like you lean forward and pay attention and go, okay, I'm going to watch it. I mean, the films, you're obviously responding to just the strengths, the acting. You're responding to a certain kind of urban quality, which I
Yeah.
guess being a little Orange County kid in shorts, you start to go. Like I started slicking my hair back and wearing pants
Yeah.
and button-down shirts. Like it changed the way I dress. I was like a kid. I was like, I should dress like I'm in The Godfather. Like I legit did that when I was about 11 years old.
Uh,
uh, there was an element of becoming a man. That's like what a man looks like.
uh.
And the organized crime element, the danger of it. I mean, it just seemed like adult and legitimate and real
Was
and
there
solid.
something, was there anger festering within you at all? Was there something that, I remember this feeling of like being a young boy and wanting to, become the right kind of man, whatever vision you're starting to, get obsessed with.
Yeah.
But so much of this is about, there's a lot of violence, there's a lot of cursing. Was it just that sort of adolescent age that you tether that to, or was there something, else in there? As a kid, a self-described loner at the time, you spent most of the time in your room, and yet you're hanging out with imaginary gangsters.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that there was some anger involved in it, but I was so lucky. I truly am lucky in my life that I discovered, and I said, and everybody loves Martin Scorsese, but I'm so lucky that I discovered his films at 12 years old, because I cannot imagine not only a better filmmaker, but just a better teacher, a better window into the world of cinema and of life than him. And the reason I zero in on him is that the Godfather is one level of it where you go, oh, cool, a guy in a trench coat with a gun, and Goodfellas, and then even Casino later is almost like this weird subversion of it. It's almost throwing that other stuff in the garbage, saying like, no, this isn't about family, or it's not. These aren't operatic adult themes. These guys are basically consumerists who live in the suburbs. In fact, they actually in Goodfellas, they actually just live in houses, and they don't live in the city. Their life actually looks more like an Orange County life. So it kind of drew it all back to me, and that anger. There is an anger, but Scorsese kind of identified what the anger is and said, like, yeah, it's kind of universal. It's not just your parents. I kind of looked around. I said, oh my God, my parents and so-and-so's parents and everything's, they're all kind of in this consumerism thing, which he identified and continues to identify really in movies.
So I love that it feels like a good title for something, gangster in shorts. So you were.
And what's so funny is in The Irishman, with the most recent Scorsese underworld film, Jimmy Hoffa talks about you don't wear shorts to a meeting, and I remember thinking that's really how I feel in life. You never wear shorts to a meeting.
So was this affecting, in addition to all that other stuff, the way that you were speaking? Like, you had friends. You it's not like you're like a sad. You're not a sad loner or anything like that. But I'm just like curious. Like, did you start to model some of this stuff in your friend group?
I don't think so.
Okay.
No, it was impossible. No one understood what this was. No one understood what I was talking about. I don't think I met anyone who'd seen any of these movies until I was like 17. If you wanted to talk to people about movies, you had to relate to them on what was out at the time, and there were very good films out at the time. You could talk to people about Speed. You could talk to people about Forrest Gump. You could talk to people about The Lion King. You could talk to people about, and the one that really, the next step in this evolution was Tarantino. Pulp Fiction was a huge revelation for anyone who saw it, and I saw it when I was 14. And that was the one that people in my friend group had seen, and there was a certain, vibe that came from that. Certainly if you're talking about crime films, underworld films.
It's interesting because I think, well, not as young as you. We have an age gap, but I didn't start watching that stuff until maybe like high school. But it follows like a similar trajectory where it's like, I remember there was some documentary. I rented it from Hollywood Video, or got my dad to rent it from Hollywood Video, about 70s cinema. And that changed everything for me, because before that, I was just like really into Lord of the Rings and Star Wars and big things, The Matrix. And then watching this documentary, we're showing clips from The French Connection and Annie Hall and all this kind of stuff. Like, I really dove deep into that. And right after that, it was sort of like my DVD of Mean Streets. That was revolutionary to me. And then, Tarantino, Pulp Fiction. And there is this feeling of meta-ness to it as well. It does feel, at least for Quentin Tarantino, it feels like that ties into your interest in that parody films as well, where like this is a meta experience.
Yes, and now when you're saying that you the order that you watch these films, like, did you see, for instance, The French Connection before Pulp Fiction?
Yes,
okay,
I did. Yeah.
To me, that seems like the proper, and I know that you're younger, so you could have watched these in any order.
Yeah.
But to me, this seems like legitimately the proper order to experience them in. Because for as much as I love Tarantino, I think that he makes movies about movies. I think he would admit to this, that he makes movies about movie people and movie violence and movie tropes. The parody film
Yeah.
is not that divorced from exactly from what we're talking about. And so I always identify a certain kind of film viewer who started with Tarantino, because they started with the abstraction. They didn't start with anything that's trying to be a real understanding of violence.
Yeah.
They started with the movie version of it, which is Quentin Tarantino. Brian De Palma is also kind of in this category, a director who's a little bit more of a movie person than really trying to dissect what does violence mean,
Yeah.
for any of us.
Or capture authentic life sometimes. There are elements of Tarantino where that's the goal, but there's always this feeling of Tarantino's eyes have been dropped into the into the scenario.
Yes, the one film, and it's a film that many people now say it's their favorite Tarantino film, is Jackie Brown, and I kind of wish that he would make another film like that felt less rooted in abstraction and more just like, hey, here's a real character study of real aging people, and in a certain way that is maybe his crowning, that might be his best film, in a way, because it's the one where he seemed to drop the meta-ness, for a minute.
So it seems like you were drawn into these the genre of gangster film. You were awoken to the concept of filmmaking from music videos, and then once you get to this Tarantino phase, there's very fine line between Tarantino and sketch comedy. All this to ask, like, out of curiosity, what's the first official craft that you would say you pursued? Was it filmmaking or something else?
I think it's safe to say filmmaking. I think it's safe to say that I've not pursued a ton of crafts outside of filmmaking, outside of the fundamental whatever skills of filmmaking, which is to say that in my life I'm good, or not even good. I've trained at 4 things, which is writing, directing, acting, and editing, and a little bit of songwriting and singing, which is my mainly do for work purposes. I don't really like make music in my garage in my spare time or anything. I don't have a garage to make the music. I can't make the music. I don't have a garage. But those are the 4 things that I've worked at almost exclusively in my life. And so I guess the first of those that I kind of started playing around with was filmmaking, taking out a camera. It wasn't a camcorder. It was like a one of these cameras that like connects to a deck, to like an RCA deck, and just shooting. The very first times I did it, it's young, and it's an experience I think now kids do all the time with phones. And I won't say that because it's a thing that a lot of kids do, that it's illegitimate or artistically uninteresting. Yeah. It's just, I'd say like the early experimentations with it were those kind of sketch things where it's like, oh, you turn on a camera and you do Wayne's World in front of the camera or whatever. It's the kind of thing that a lot of kids like to do. But around the time that I just discovered the Scorsese films, I was like, well, wait a minute. Each shot is deliberate, and you can do an interesting shot, not necessarily having a very sophisticated sense of that, but let me try to do an interesting shot. And then I started reading about storyboards, and you start drawing pictures and, thinking about how things cut together. And so that's that's the crap. That's the thing that I could say I started doing at about the age of 11, 12, 13, that I still do to this day when it's time to go direct something.
It's not surprising that these are the crafts that people who enjoy their alone time fall into, like, and enjoy, delving into their imaginations, like thinking about a sequence, imagining a conversation, all this stuff. Did you eventually find like a group of friends? Were they in high school, or I suppose like I know that you went to UCLA. Mm-hmm. Did you find your own sort of hometown American zoetrope?
I didn't find in high school. It was a little bit rougher. I had a cousin. My cousin Scotty was like a brother to me when I was a kid, and we made little things together, sketches mostly. So that was a collaborator. That was someone where he would come over, and it wasn't. We would play video games too and stuff, but it was like, wait, okay, we have like 3 hours. Let's make a movie,
Nice.
That became the thing. And so that became very, very fun. That's some of the most fun filmmaking I've ever had in my life, is 16 years old, running around with a camera and doing just, making.
It does feel like you're in a band too. There, when you have the that camaraderie with someone else that you're making movies or videos with,
Yeah.
the inside jokes become like a tower.
Yes.
Stack
Oh
on
yeah.
top of each
Yeah.
other. Yeah.
Oh yeah. It's not. Yeah. It's not stuff. It's stuff that you'd never show any. I would never show anybody and go, "Hey, look at this funny thing I make," because it doesn't make sense. It's like you're pulling lines from TV. You're straight up like plagiarizing entire chunks of television and then
Yeah.
making very specific in jokes, and it doesn't make any sense. It's not like a good, clean, short film,
Yeah.
and then you make your entire family watch it, which is excruciating. But like, I'm sure everyone did a nice job of at least pretending like they're enjoying, whatever you made that day. But then when I was in school, I made there was actually an audio visual class, like a little video editing class that was at my high school, and I made a couple of short films on video for that class, and those I guess would be more legitimate attempts at, like, let me see if I can make something that reaches an audience that's not in my blood family. And so I made one or two. One was like a little short film with just me in it, and then one was I got one or two friends from school to come over and make something, and it was a really very, speaking of Tarantino, it was a very Tarantino knockoff thing. It was basically like, what if like some guys at a poker game get mad at each other or whatever, and there's a lot of cultural references to Elvis and everything in there, and it was really just working through that absolute fanaticism of Tarantino.
Yeah, and what is the art of a good conversational tangent? I do think that that is something that Tarantino is particularly good at, and that is the thing that stands out when you're looking at an imitation of his work. I don't know how he finds that fine line.
And I think at a certain point he just had to abandon it. I think that if you watch a Tarantino movie now and they were like, "Hey, when I went to Burger King the other day," and you'd be like, "What the hell are you doing this thing from like 40 years ago?" You'd be like, we don't do that anymore. That stopped with Seinfeld.
That does feel like something where, like, the evolution of technology is the reason that you don't see that. Like, we're inundated with so many, observations about the world just by scrolling our phones. But I suppose there was a time where just like simply hearing, I think a lot of Kevin Smith was that too, simply hearing a character go on a rant about Star Wars kind of cements it, to kind of gives you the sense of like, oh, it's not just me. But now all that stuff is all over the place. You click on YouTube, you see 1,000 versions of that.
Yeah, and sitcoms eventually became it. Apatow became it. It's to such a degree where we have to invent something new. I don't think that. I think that if you sat down and wrote what is essentially a stand-up routine about, the Mary Tyler Moore Show or whatever observation you have, and tried to put it in dialogue, people would go, "What are you doing? What are you doing? Some kind of Tarantino knockoff Seinfeld, freaking knocked up?" It would just seem very tired. Yeah,
you're making me wish that Tarantino made a movie starring Jerry Seinfeld. Can you imagine that? I can actually. I would love to see Jerry Seinfeld do a dark role.
Oh, I think Seinfeld's got it in him because he's a dark kind of guy. Remember when Albert Brooks did that movie Drive? And people were astonished that he could play a villain. I'm like, there's a lot of comedians that have that villainous edge, and Seinfeld's might be chief among them. He's an angry man.
I can somehow really imagine Jerry Seinfeld yelling at me.
Yeah.
It's not a leap of the imagination. I've never really considered that before, but he will cut to the bone. I'm very sure.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Oh, no. There's the famous moment is when he, after Kramer, Michael Richards had his very racist rant at the Laugh Factory. There was an apology that took place on the Letterman show. Do you remember this?
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, and Jerry went on there, right? Yeah.
And Jerry kind of presented Michael Richards, and Michael Richards is an odd man and started making this apology, and the audience started laughing, and Jerry Seinfeld scolded the audience, said, "Don't laugh." And to this day, that sticks in my brain. Don't laugh. He's not being funny.
But now that we're bringing up Jerry Seinfeld, when I think about his descriptions of his childhood, he's an only child, seemed to spend a lot of time alone, and that cultivated this craft of comedy in him. You decided to become a filmmaker. Was that a daunting thing to say out loud. I mean, I had that same thing. My original goal was to be a filmmaker, and I feel like maybe filmmaking is such a gradual thing. Like your parents can see that interest build in a very specific way, where it wasn't like a shocking thing, but I think it is starting off as a young filmmaker can just be like a cute thing, and it can be hard to get out of that cuteness towards the seriousness. So how did you kind of balance that from showing these sketches to your family and then taking it very seriously to the point where it's like, I'm going to school for this and this is the thing that I like to pursue?
That was never for me. Thankfully, was never a challenge to convince my parents about it. I never really wanted to do much of anything else.
Hmm.
Save for like maybe there was like maybe a month when I was a teenager where I was like, oh, maybe I want to be a cop or something, you know, like, or maybe I wanted to be in the army. That was another thing I wanted. Both those didn't go over well with my parents.
Really? In Orange County? I'm surprised, actually.
Well, my dad was in the army, and he said, no, you're not going to be in the army.
Okay, yeah.
The filmmaking was very my mother in particular just never batted an eyelash. It was absolute belief that I could do this from. I mean, I was saying I wanted to be a filmmaker when I was 5 or 6. I mean, I didn't even know how to dress myself, you know, and I wanted to be a movie director, you know. So like, yeah, so I was very devoted to it, and a decision to go to film school was a very logical one, and I was only limited by my own limitations, my own talent and intellect, really. But I it wasn't like I had to come out like mom and dad, I'd like to be a filmmaker. I'd like to be a creative person. My father also is a musician for a living.
Oh, nice.
So the idea of being a struggling artist was not a sin, you know.
Yeah.
It was maybe a sin to my mother as we struggled with money.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. Boy, am I dealing with all that stuff now at this point of the entertainment industry. But what instrument?
Right, as is everybody.
I know. Yeah. What instrument did your dad play? I mean, that is a big deal to be a musician for a living, as you described it.
Yes, he played the bass guitar and still plays. Yeah, played in various bands around Orange County and in some session work, and a very good. My father's a very devoted artist, craftsman in his own way. You know, very very in a very low key way. Not like a he doesn't pontificate much about art. But set an example of someone for me who's very, very serious about it, you know. And my sister as well, my younger sister, became a musician as well, and is a very good one.
Nice. That
very
sounds
good
like
singer-songwriter.
It sounds like I mean, would you describe a lot of this as like idyllic? It doesn't sound like there's much to complain about childhood-wise.
I mean, there's a lot to complain about childhood-wise, but it's not. It's with relations to the art stuff. No, the complications came in all these other ways of just living, you know.
Yeah.
But the art stuff, you know, it's weird because I mean this sincerely. Like God was in the household. We were a God-fearing family, but art was the second God, you know, like, I mean that in the general sense of music and movies and everything else. I guess it was just being raised with like a certain respect for it. And I'm not talking about the fine arts. I'm not talking about we went to the opera. I'm saying like the actual thing of having music in the house and having movies on in the house. And there was a time, God, around that time I'm talking about when I was 12, 13 years old, you're putting movies on and just, we're talking about the themes of them, and I can remember my parents just getting emotional over them. And when you've seen that kind of thing, it's very difficult to want to do anything else with your life, you know.
Yeah. My memory is that as someone who spent so much time indoors, going outside meant going to the movies, and that was my portal into all kinds of learning of how things work. And just to dive a little bit, because this is interesting to me, this for me, I grew up very religious as well, and I still have a connection to faith that I think is a little, you know, generalized. It's not hyper specific.
Me too, but me too as well. I do. It's hard to articulate it, but yeah.
But did you have the same thing where like by, it's almost easier to play a movie than open a book, but did you like engaging with these challenging concepts? And I also wonder, as your parents are watching these often the same movies, did you get a sense of the sort of very Christian way of finding a Christian narrative in something that that is almost
Mhm.
objectively antithetical to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what happens is you start to feel a because I was I was, and I said, like I say, I still have this in my heart as something that I still have what I believe to be a relationship with God in my life, but I had it really in a very super defined way at this time, my young adolescence and teenage years and everything. And you love the thing, it's like you love movies so much, you're trying to find a religious theme in them. Like at the end of
Yeah,
Pulp Fiction, when Samuel L. Jackson is like quoting the Bible,
yeah,
you're
yeah,
like, thank God this has like a religious relevance to it. Like I'm allowed to like this now, this movie, which has, like heads blowing up and people getting raped and, I mean, crazy stuff.
yeah,
So it's almost like you're in many cases, you're overlaying your own hope for the artwork on top of it, and so you're trying to find. But then also there's films. I mean, I remember, to bring up De Palma, I remember seeing the film Carlito's Way, and being like, oh, this is a really remarkable movie. I'm gonna say, let's rent this, and my parents watch it with my parents, And I remember it was either my mom or dad or somebody saying, like, this, what a waste, like. And I don't think that movie's a waste, but the concept was, this guy can make a beautiful movie, and what does he make it about? He just makes this kind of trash whatever, because
yeah.
that whatever, they didn't see any redeeming at the particular time, any redeeming merit in the movie. So those kinds of discussions happen where you go, well, this has artistry, but what is there behind it? Is there any real, is this a good thing for your soul, you
Yes,
know
yes. I remember I just had this feeling that I would write like short stories and I guess like sort of sketch things. And I always felt like whenever, I presented them to my family, they were, the critique would almost be like, but where's Jesus in here? Or like, yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's just such a funny thing. It's just like, this isn't a story if it doesn't harken back to, harken back to this other story in some way.
Yes. Whereas yes, I forget. It's funny that you mentioned that. Like, I forget that was certainly a much more of a consideration than now. Even though I think a part of it stays with you, a part of that always stays with you. Like, what am I actually saying here? Even if you're not in that particular season of your life, you're not deeply connected to the Gospels or whatever.
Yeah.
You're so that you can't just uh, enter into this business with the. I guess it's like the idea of, like, you're entering into it with some sense of responsibility. You're not just going and making the most craven, you know, stuff. And otherwise, I would become a pornographer, and I would probably be much more successful.
So when you step into UCLA, I love, because I remember I took some film classes and things, and I would love to go back in time, me now, to witness those first interactions with other weird loner kids who decided they want to be filmmakers,
Mhm.
meeting each other for the first time. So when you got to UCLA, did you have your hair slicked back and were you talking manically like Quentin Tarantino? Like, who was who were you emulating, and how were you defining yourself? Because that is such a pressure in a way. Every filmmaker early on, when they meet each other, they are kind of presenting an idea of the filmmaker that they want to be. Same with comedy too. But like, who was that person?
Gosh, I don't even know what I dressed like back then. I mean, dressed however I don't know, very Mervin's style of dressing, but I think what at that point in my life, by the time I was 20, I had a different revelation, which is that I had seen the movies of John Cassavetes,
Oh yeah, yeah.
which I loved, not just on I love them for what everyone loves them for, which is that they're these wonderful examples of independent filmmaking. They really show how you can make a film on your own, just with your own grit and determination. And
Hmm.
but I also love them for what they were. Like, I really connected with them as artistic works about life and family and love and marriage and things that I had seen in my own family. And
Yeah.
So I what I was probably emulating at that point in my life was or trying to get across was Cassavetes' sense of passion. And so if you talked to me back then, I was probably talking about John Cassavetes, and I was probably talking about somewhat evangelistically about movies, and I think it was
Yeah.
maybe charming, but perhaps also off-putting to people, a little bit much for people. I was on fire. I mean, like, when they talk about people being on fire with the Holy Spirit or something, I was on fire
Yeah.
with the Holy Spirit of at that time. Yeah,
I know that exact feeling, and I'm in a number of ways, I'm trying to get back to that to that feeling.
I know it's not a bad thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it really isn't. That sort of fierce motivation connected to the arts. But you're making me think of, I'm pretty sure when Bill Hader did his Criterion Closet picks, he mentioned you. I don't
He
remember
did.
why, but I feel like he also has an obsession with John Cassavetes. I can hear Bill Hader saying that name.
John Cassavetes, yeah. I'm doing him. He did me. I'm doing him. Yes, no, it's a thing. I mean, when I was at that age, because I saw those films when I was like 14, 15, late at night on television. The Bravo Network put them on, which they used to put movies on the Bravo Network.
Yeah.
So I thought I was like the only person my age in the world who had seen them. And then of course you get into show business and you realize that everyone, it's a thing that's many filmmakers and people have connected to. It's, in a way, it's a sad thing because you go, I thought this was mine. And then you realize oh, everybody saw this and loved it. But no, it's just it's the best acting you'll ever see in your life, and then it's also just a model for how to make a movie that to this day I'm like, I guess that's the model. I think it's actually the model we're going to increasingly probably have to use because movies aren't getting financed.
I guess, yeah, it feels like now, I don't know what it takes, but I think we need to have this sense of like limitation when it comes to presenting an interesting new indie film. If the internet is indeed the future, we need to figure something out, because it's not the same as picking up a video, going to the movies on a whim, going to a film festival. That kind of scares me sometimes. Or like, Vimeo felt like the future for a little while. now,
yeah. Yes, the staff pick. Yeah.
So yeah, the Bill Hader thing, like, how the hell did you get from all of this that we just described to a focus on comedy?
That was basically out of UCLA. I had to, right after I graduated, I had to leave Los Angeles for a while. My mother was ill for a while, and so I spent about a year back home. Which I don't regret. It was very good for reading and watching a lot of films and focusing up. And that's when I actually started writing the very first sketches I ever wrote. I'd written some as a kid, I guess, in high school and everything. But that's when I sat down and I wrote like a packet of like probably 100 pages worth of sketches, and some of them were like one page, and some of them were like 15 pages. Some of them were short films, really. But yeah, so that was like kind of like a first inkling of like, wait a minute, this may be a legitimate way of expressing myself in a chapter of my life that I want to experience here as making comedy. And then the real thing was getting involved in the UCB Theater, which opened in Los Angeles in 2005. So I wasn't a little kid when I started getting becoming a part of that, but I took a lot of improv classes, took a lot of sketch writing classes. I didn't touch a camera for about 5 or 6 years. I only did theater during that time, and just devoted myself to just writing a lot of sketches, performing every single opportunity I could perform, doing it really any time that I could be on that stage doing it. I was very bad. I'm to this day not a particularly great improviser. I don't get.
But was it that the same fierce dedication that you had to film, that being on fire religiously, as you described?
It was. I don't know if I don't know if I felt it in the burning center of my core. It was more of a. It was talk about finally having colleagues or peers or something. That's what it felt more like. It felt like oh, there's a community of people who you can now express yourself with, and you can compare your sense of humor with their sense of humor, and you can find incredibly funny people and identify them. And I was very good at identifying them. I knew exactly who I liked and who I liked working with, and the people I admired most. And and so yeah, I very much enjoyed doing it. Obviously I did almost nothing but it, except that, and maintained day jobs and stuff for about 5 years. But it wasn't I was lucky to not have it be the first discovery of creativity in my life, because then it would have been tied very much with the theater and Del Close, and it's almost like your first religious experience being a cult. Not to say that UCB is a cult, but
I know
it's not dissimilar from
Yeah. When I moved to Chicago, I'm from LA, but moved to Chicago in 2012 to focus on comedy, and I was highly disturbed by stepping into Second City and realizing that everyone had this very narrow, singular goal out of it in a system that's like all layered and has class levels and things like that.
What was the goal?
To Saturday Night Live. Like on some level, everyone there wanted to get onto this one show.
Yes.
It's bizarre. Yeah.
Yeah, and that from there that journey, I did all that work at UCB, and then I got the job at Funny or Die. I was hired by Adam McKay to work as a writer director at Funny or Die. I worked there for about a year and a half. Loved working there, and then a former head writer of Saturday Night Live, Harper Steele, took over as the head writer of Funny or Die, and recommended me for Saturday Night Live. And through her recommendation, I was hired there, and then worked at Saturday Night Live, and then came back to Funny or Die and worked there for like another 6 years.
Funny or Die is the space that kind of defined internet comedy, right? Like there wasn't much. What is it? What was it, like E-Bombs World, maybe, which isn't making
jib jab, yeah. It's weird. I don't, to this day, I couldn't tell you I'm a bad person to give any oral history of that time, because I don't even know if I was connected to. I don't even know if I was like super up to date on every video being watched. But Funny or Die was at least attempting something unique, in that they were trying to do sort of like a more refined version of YouTube, in terms of people uploading videos and then making their originals. And to this day, I say that Funny or Die made, during the time that I was there, made I think made the best comedy. Yeah, the best sketch comedy that was made in an audiovisual form, and also made the worst. They represented the polarities. And Saturday Night Live was somewhere in the middle. They ran a more they towed the line of the middle.
Yeah. But it seems like through that you must have gotten a firsthand account of that weird Facebook crunch that happened to everything in online media, where everything sort of got flattened at some point. Everything's through the social media site and not through the specific website Funny or Die. Like, were you around during that time? I forget like when that really started to really take effect.
Oh yeah, gosh, I think I was there. Are you talking about like how the majority of views come from Facebook than from people coming? Oh yes, yeah. I was definitely there for that, and probably put more hours of my life into griping about that than I should have ever done. But yes, that was a real. I mean, it's a little bit like now, where everyone's wondering, like, where do the views come from, and how are you going to get seen, and how do you monetize and everything? And Funny or Die was kind of interesting, because we were privy to some of those conversations. You would just be sitting in a room with like the CEO going like, I don't know, like, we gotta do this. We have to have an app. That's the future. And so you're like, okay, I guess we're doing an app now. Or it's a weird time. It's a weird time that there were just so many. Because I don't know if you had this thought when you saw the YouTube popping off, as like, did you think like, here it is, this is where I get to be a filmmaker, this is where like, the filmmakers will be discovered?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. When I had moved out to Chicago, it was this feeling of like, oh, web series is kind of the future. So my friend Ian Abramson and we got into this weird situation where we were making a live action spin-off to a cartoon that Tom Snyder, not of late night fame, but Tom Snyder, the creator of Dr. Katz.
Yes.
He made this cartoon for YouTube called Explosion Bus with Jonathan Katz. But I was a huge Dr. Katz fan.
I
And
love Dr. Katz.
Same.
Yeah, yeah.
And sorry to make this about me all of a sudden. I'll make this very quick. I was listening to the audio commentary of an episode where Tom Snyder was talking about the fact that, like all of the motion is really just implied here. Like you'll never see someone walk across the screen. It's just a close up of someone talking, a close up of the other person talking. And when you go back to the first person, they're standing up all of a sudden. And that kind of blew my mind. And so I got Eden and I, we just riffed some audio and tried to do that with photographs. And we put it up for our friends and called it Dr. Katz Experiment. And then when this Explosion Bus show was coming out, they found that and they reached out for us. This very bizarre, weird thing. But I'll just describe this like weird buzz around the internet around that sort of like 2012 time period.
Mm-hmm.
And to see it now where it's just like, it's so commodified. Everyone knows the rules to it. And so it's fun to look back now and feel like, oh, this was the Wild West of exploration that's never going to come back.
Yeah, it did feel like I mean, I was pretentious enough to make the comparison in the time that it felt like the beginning of movies. Like it felt like some very similar technology. A kinetoscope is a little tiny box that you look in and you watch little clips of people falling down, and the internet is a little tiny box that you look in on a screen, and watch people falling down, and then there's a refinement of the art form, and then someone comes along and advances it and puts more money and more time and craft into it and everything. So you kind of see that, like that's how it felt in that 2012 era, and also established people from television, going, Tim Barnes, I like what you do, or Ryan, you're pretty. I've worked at Saturday Night Live for years, and I think you're all right, that kind of world. My only regret is I wish it had turned into more. I wish we were still doing it. I wish that the Wild West still existed. It's rare now when a friend makes a piece of video content for the internet.
Yeah, and this feeling of it feels almost weird to put an inside joke type thing onto YouTube now. Like it feels like it has to be this more polished product somehow. And I don't know. Like I don't know the last time I shared a YouTube like a YouTube sketch to someone, like you have to watch this. Although I'm sure tons of people are doing that. It's just, I don't know. Maybe it's just having experienced so much of it, and even, similar to you being on the other side of that. Like I remember when I was at Comedy Central Digital as a sketch writer, I'd be in these big meetings where people are talking about drop-off numbers, like when people stop watching the video and I have to keep their attention right off the bat, and this sort of scary matrix behind it all.
Yeah, which I think is very antithetical to, I used to complain about it back in the day, and I think now if you're a TikTok person or an Instagram person, and I've seen really brilliant people. By the way, I saw brilliant people on Vine. There were sketch groups on Vine where I would go, my God, these people are really funny.
Yeah.
But the mentality that you have about retaining fans and the speed and that you have to work, and one is a different art form, but I just think everyone should be entitled to, when they're young, a period of not worrying about that at all. Yeah. And it hurts me. It hurts my heart sometimes to think about 12-year-old kids going, how do I retain all my followers, for the characters I'm doing, you should be allowed to explore,
Yeah. I guess it's also that this feel the permanence of the internet is a part of that too. Like there's a time where like no one knew how this was going to evolve, and this sense of like, oh, my official presence is on the internet at all times. Yeah. I want to get to the last question and talk about how you feel about this journey that you've been on. I wonder if when you started to focus on comedy and sketches, it feels like maybe that was because you needed that comedic escape, like you were helping out with your mom, and was that a part of what pushed you into that direction?
Sure, a little bit. It was also an actual, that and involvement in UCB was a tactical decision about how to really get into the how to. I mean, it sounds corny, but like how to get into the industry.
Yeah.
There's a story that I tell, which is not as dramatic as it sounds, but I like telling it because it's indicative of I think what happened at this time. Is I had a friend who said around the time I was starting UCB doing improv classes, there was a friend who said there's a new production gearing up right now. It's James Cameron's new movie, and they need PAs for the movie. And I remember going over and interviewing with some dickhead over at Jim over in Culver City, and them saying like, this is going to be a very high tech, state of the art movie, and we need PAs and people who are really on it to participate in this movie. And is there any reason why you couldn't be here 24/7? And I was like, well, I have just this one improv class on Monday nights that I'd like to be able to take. And the person interviewing me was like, you got to get your priorities straight. Like you got to realize this is show business. This is, and I don't even think I got that job. And of course the movie was Avatar. And the reality is that rather than become a PA, I was I pursued comedy, and 5 years later, when Avatar came out, I ended up watching it at SNL. So it's a weird thing where I knew that my way in was going to be. I knew I had a better shot at a creative expression, even if it was a flawed creative expression, than like getting a job in movies. Like I knew that was I had a hunch that was the path. Like I've never, to this day, I'm not really a career. I don't really care about a career so much, I don't know if that answers the question, but I think that was maybe the feeling of like getting involved with comedy was like, how am I going to do this? Am I going to I'm nobody's nephew. Do you just knock on the door of the studio and say, give me a job, or what do you do? And I kind of thought, well, I guess if I write a lot of stuff and become a performer and everything, maybe something will get noticed.
Yeah.
That it was in many ways a strategical thought.
That's beautifully put. That how you ended up watching it when you were at SNL. Here it comes, Ryan. The last question. How do you feel about that first pursuit now, that first pursuit of becoming a filmmaker? I imagine all right, but you could prove me wrong.
Oh no, I feel it was very necessary. I wish that I had been a little bit more organized in my thinking. Like if you look at like the very first films Edgar Wright ever made when he was, a teenager, they're very good. And he can show them. He can be like, look, everyone, I made a movie and it was very good. I'm not like that. Mine were not well-rounded and beautiful. So I wish that I had been maybe like more. I had a greater attention to detail. To tell you the truth, I wish I had a greater attention to detail in all the work that I've done. And the next, I guess this question is really about the very first pursuit of craft, which I know some people do entirely different. Some people are bakers before they become actors or whatever.
Yeah.
But in the sense that I've continued doing the entire, really one thing for my entire life, I almost put it all under one umbrella. The things I made when I was 12 are the same as the things I made when I was 35. I think they're all flawed, and I'm the next part of my life is about refining it. I think actually refining it into refining my craft, I guess.
Yeah.
I wouldn't, if it all caught fire and I lost all of it, it would be memories and wonderful performances and things lost. But I wouldn't mind restarting everything at this point.
Wow. No. And so do you not think that does any part of you feel a friction between the pursuits that were comedy focused, performance focused, and directing specifically, or have they all kind of like melded into one pot for you?
They all meld into one pot, I think, pretty much. But a couple years ago, I think I've tired a little bit with comedy. And I remember having my mother pass away a few years ago, and some of the last conversations I ever had with her were her telling me, "You got to stop doing this comedy shit. Like you gotta like you're doing all this silly." shit. And it wasn't, she didn't say this out of nowhere. It was more
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
it was more a conversation about frustrations I was having and everything. And that was one of the last things we ever talked about, was her going like, just do what, she had a hunch that like, there's more that you want to do besides just make like little internet sketches. Right. Like, and so that was her telling me that. And so on some level, I'm like, oh, I guess I have to honor that,
Yeah.
at a certain point. And it's not to say that I don't want to be silly,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's more this, it's more, I would like the work to actually mean something and not be so disposable.
I wonder if some of this that epiphany came from that Tonight Show time as well. Because what you're describing, your mom saying, it takes me back to what I was seeing in your eyes in those zooms, where it's like, there is something deeper going on here, and I respect the hell out of this guy. Who's you're not you didn't have the vibe of like, I think I'm above anything here, but I could just tell that there was a working brain, and you gave me hope seeing that. Seeing
well, that's,
that.
I mean, that's nice of you to say. The fact is, everybody has a deeper thing. Everyone at that job had a deeper thing,
Yeah.
going on. You included. Everybody has a deeper thing. And also, I have tremendous respect for show business. I mean, I like Jimmy's show. I like the Tonight Show. I don't think all the games and stuff that we make fun of and everything, those are important. Those give people a fun thing to watch at the end of the day. I'm perfectly happy to devote a chunk of my life to working on that kind of stuff. It's not,
Yeah.
I'm not above that in the least. I think that stuff is really important. I think comedy movies are important. I think internet videos are important. This stuff is really, really essential to, it's the Sullivan's Travels lesson you learn, is that like, oh, in the end, the cartoon, like a Looney Tunes cartoon is important to people. It's
Yeah.
just that, is that what you want to do with all of your life? That's a question all of us have to ask,
Yeah, yeah. Or just like sort of expanding, the depth that comedy can have in some way. Like, for some reason in my head, comedy doesn't mean what it used to be. I still have an interest in comedy, but it doesn't mean the same thing that it meant to me, 10, 15 years ago. Like, comedy is quite serious to me, actually.
Yeah, I think it's okay to take it seriously. I don't think that's pretentious or anything like that. I think it's okay to take it. And I think also, like, drama, things that we categorize as drama, sometimes are the funniest things in the world. You can take your sensibility and put it in drama and in musical or whatever form that you choose. You don't have to just make straight up, like Thursday night, St. Dennis Medical, like
Yeah.
that is not the end all be all. It does not fit on the Comedy Central channel,
Yeah.
like not everything has to fit in there. And we're reaching a point culturally where people are just kind of tired. I think they're tired of what they're seeing, and it's not to give a state of the industry, but I think taking your work seriously, even if it is the lightest sketch material in the world, the most disposable sketch material in the world. I don't want to take any, I think I'm at a point of not wanting to take any of it for granted or make any of it disposable anymore. It's why I probably will never work in advertising again.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Even though it's good money when you can get it. But I don't, I'm not going to live forever, and I don't want to do that anymore.
Yeah. Well, that's a lovely note for yeah.
So I'm going to go die now.
As you know, on this podcast, we famously end by having the guest say, "I'm not going to live forever." So,
yeah, I'm really looking
keep
for
it crispy.
a clip that you can play for my obituary. Like in the, I just think it's the love that you give is equal to what you get. And then it's like Ryan Perez, 1980 to 2025.
Well, seriously, thank you so much for joining me on the show, and I'm glad that I finally did get to unpeel some layers of Ryan Perez.
Thank you so much for having me, Tim. I think it's been a wonderful discussion because I get to talk about me. But thank you so much for just asking the questions and for being curious about it. And this is a terrific show. And I enjoy you. You're a great interviewer, and I think you have an ability to draw people out. And so I appreciate being a part of it.
Thank you. Thank you. As always, I believe in you, Ryan.
Thank you, Tim. I as well. Believe in you.